So we are going to take a look at a tangent graph with everything including phase shift and vertical shift, and what do we do first. So this is depending on your level of comfort. It should be fairly easy in terms of you having had memorized before the 3 key points for each cycle for the tangent function, and then just really the order and how that it all affects things like vertical asymptotes. So we'll first take a look at how and I'll kind of go through each one individually, but how the two affects the period and the phase shift. So let's start with the period first. When I'm calculating the period for tangent or cotangent, I first start with the fact that it typically is pi, and then I divide by that constant out front, which should be not out front, but out front of x. So dividing by 2, now we get that our period is, instead of pi, it's pi over 2. Remember that when we graph a cycle of tangent, one cycle, whether it's tangent, sine, or cosine, I'm going to divide that one cycle into four subintervals. So if the entire length of this 4 interval is pi over 2, what must this coordinate point be here where the vertical asymptote first occurs? That's half of pi over 2, or pi over 4. And then the vertical asymptote on the left would have to be negative pi over 4. And then this coordinate point would be half of pi over 4, so that would give us pi over 8, and then negative pi over 8. To make it a little bit easier, I'm going to go ahead and divide and graph the next cycle as well on this curve. So adding a second vertical asymptote, so we have that second cycle there. And remembering that if this is pi over 8, where really each one of the boxes is 1 pi over 8, or 1/8 of pi. So 1 pi over 8, 2 pi over 8 is pi over 4, 3 pi over 8, 4 pi over 8, which is pi over 2, and then 5 pi over 8, and then 6 pi over 8, which is 6 pi over 8, which is 3 pi over 4. Okay, so from here, we're going to now come up with the key points that we have. I'm going to erase this little brace here. Okay, so the 3 key points are at the origin. The tangent of 0 is 0, so we always start off with that point, and that point not being affected by the 3 out front. However, when we're now taking a look at this 3 out front, we're going to consider the key points as, well, the 3 will take the point that typically is at pi over 8, 1, and stretch it up to 3. So I will erase the marker here with the arrow and just put the point there. What was at negative pi over 8, negative 1 gets stretched to negative 3, and same on the next cycle. And then from there, I haven't figured out the phase shift. I kind of left it there, so I wanted to remind you guys that the phase shift, when we're considering what happens to the left and right shifting, we want to make sure we don't make the mistake of saying this gets shifted to the right pi. Because before you do that, if there is a value like there is in front of x2, we want to make sure we factor out that too. So the function itself should be y equals 3 tangent of 2 parentheses x minus pi over 2, which leads us to conclude that then the final, so we do it in stages. We figure out the period, we address the stretch that 3 had, how 3 affected the tangent function, and then from here, all the shifting right and left I do with the up and down vertical shifts. So this tells me negative pi over 2 is right pi over 2, and then plus 1 is up 1. So again, pi over 2 is 4 of the units. So a period is pi over 2, and a period of pi over 2 we had divided into 4 equal subintervals. So now all I have to do with each blue dot is move it to the right 4 and then up 1 unit. So just to show you guys the first one, I moved 4 to the right and then up 1 to get that pink dot. So if we do the same for the next point, we get 4 to the right, up 1, 4 to the right, up 1. And so my first tangent function is going to look like that. Okay, and then the next one, I'm going to take this dot, move it over 4, and then up 1. Then right 4, up 1, right 4, up 1, and then that completes another cycle. And let me erase these pink guides here. Okay, so from there we have our second cycle going through those 3 points.